our last session of the day is an incredible panel, aptly titled "We Build It Strong, We Build It Last: Life After COVID-19." With charities everywhere having to rapidly adapt and change over the past few months, it's been seismic what we've had to do. We've got 3 different organizations with us who'll be sharing their key takeaways on how they're looking towards the future and harnessing these learnings in order to build strong, successful organizations going forward. With that in mind, I'd like to hand over to our CEO of Charity Digital, Jonathan, who will introduce the panel and get you started. Thanks, everybody, and I'll see you in a bit.
Thanks, Chris. I hope everybody's doing well. This is obviously the last session of what's been quite a compact day, but hopefully everybody's finding it very useful. I'm very excited to be introducing this panel. It's intended to be very forward-looking, but obviously building on the experience that has happened in the last few months. I'm really excited that we've got such a great panel as well. So I'm going to introduce each of those in turn. Starting off with Joe Kerr, who is the Director of Impact and Innovation at Turn to Us.
Hi there, Jonathan. Hi, everyone.
Would you like to say a few words just about what you do in your organisation?
Absolutely. So I've been at Turn to Us since the beginning of this year, quite an interesting time to join an organisation, and previously have built a career in the charity sector with a focus on digital, that key phrase, digital transformation, which we all remember from 2015 was a big part of my work. And now at Turn to Us, we focus on using data, insight and impact measurement to make the most change through digital, but also through other channels, make the most change that we can for people in poverty or financial hardship, and working in co-production with people as well. So we're designing services with the people that we support, not for them or to them.
Okay, thanks. Next we go to Naomi Alexander Nader, and Naomi is the Community Manager of the Finance Innovation Lab. Naomi, could you say a few words to introduce your organisation as well, please?
Sure, thanks Jonathan, and thanks for having me. I'm feeling very zen after that yoga, so I get back into panel mood, but thanks to Zoe and Rabia for that. So yeah, I'm community manager of an organisation called the Finance Innovation Lab. We work on financial systems change, so trying to transform the financial system both for people and planet, and that covers a whole range of causes, from poverty, financial hardship, inequality, climate and so forth. And we do that through a variety of different ways, including working with mainstream finance, working with the third sector, but the work I suppose that we're best known for is supporting early stage innovators who are building kind of financial products and services that serve people and planet.
Thanks. And then we have Emily Casson, and Emily is the Digital Marketing Manager at Cats Protection. Emily, could you say a few words as well to introduce your organisation?
Hey, I work in our digital marketing team, which sits in our income generation. So primarily my job's about digital fundraising, but with a slightly broader remit. And Cats Protection, for those of you who don't know us, are the UK's largest cat welfare charity. So in a normal year, we'd be supporting about 200,000 cats through rehoming and neutering. Obviously, COVID has changed that slightly. And I'm also chair of the Institute of Fundraising up in the North East, as you can probably tell from the Geordie accent, and sit on the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee for the Institute of Fundraising.
Good, thank you. So as I said at the opening, we want this session to be mainly forward-looking, but I think it's useful just to start us off if each of you say where your organisations are digitally at this moment in time and what actually changed post-COVID. Maybe if we start with Emily on this one.
Yeah, well, I think, as Joe mentioned, digital transformation is not necessarily a new thing, but for us, we were kind of still on that journey before all this. We've definitely speeded up a lot of things post-COVID, and we've kind of had to transform various areas of the business. Obviously, our model's very much around adoption centres and volunteer branches rehoming cats. So we shut our services completely for the kind of first few weeks and have now reopened on our new contactless rehoming services. So we've had to do quite a lot of changes for that. And we've also done a lot of changes with our education team. Obviously, with schools being shut, we've introduced new Moggy modules that we're sending to people every week, and doing a lot of Facebook Lives and delivering the education slightly differently. And from a digital fundraising side, we were always keen on innovation, trying new things, but we've kind of quadrupled activity during COVID because the results have been so well. And we've really found a difference to all of our fundraising activity. So I think we're definitely getting there on our digital journey. I wouldn't say we're quite there yet. We're still learning, but COVID's definitely speeded up that process.
Good. And Naomi, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, sure. So although the lab is a charity, in a lot of ways we're quite similar to a startup, and like a lot of the startups that we work with, in that we're just small, there's just 6 of us, we've only been around for about 5 years, we all kind of work exclusively from our laptops anyway, and we have quite flexible working arrangements where some of the team members often work from home. We already use quite a lot of digital tools such as Slack and so forth for our internal comms. So that's meant in general, I think we were pretty well set up to transition to lockdown. But even for us, it's been a major change. I mean, we've gone from being a central London-based charity to having only 2 members of the team, I think, within the M25. We've gone from being all together at least once a week, normally a lot more than that, to not being together at all. And we've actually had 2 members of the team, so for us that's a third of our whole team, including our new CEO, start in this period and have to be inducted exclusively in this lockdown. But I think, I mean, we're a kind of community organisation, and that we're really there to support the organisations in our community, many of which are third sector, some of which are startups as well. And I imagine, as has been the case for any kind of membership organisations or organisations who provide capacity building support in the audience, our focus has really been on how we can support the community in this time. And our community programme was previously designed predominantly around face-to-face engagements, both in terms of kind of larger community events, but also in-person meetings. And that's obviously completely changed. We've had to move everything remotely. And I think a big part of that for us has been kind of creating space to support community members. You know, like all small charities, we struggle with capacity, and so that means sometimes we have to have quite strict time constraints on how much time we're able to offer to individual community members. But in the first weeks of lockdown in particular, it felt really important to properly check in with people via online mediums, of course, what would be useful for them, and kind of the support they needed, the responses that the work they were doing in response to COVID-19, but also how they were getting on as people, and use that to inform what we did next. And I would say, in terms of kind of moving everything online, there's you know, been some challenges, as there always is. I think creating some of the kind of community, kind of organic community building that you have at events online can be difficult, but there's also been some really, really good parts of doing online only events. I mean, an obvious one, but I think it's an important one, is how it has opened up participation for people outside of London. And for us, that's not only been in terms of events, but we've also seen in the last few weeks, we just have more people joining the community from outside of London, because they now think, well, this is for me, and that's not something they necessarily thought of before. So that's something we're definitely keen to continue moving forward.
Good, thank you. And Joe, where are things at with Turn to Us?
So, as I said, Turn to Us is an organisation that works with people in poverty and financial hardship, and particularly people who experience a financial shock that risks bringing them into poverty. And COVID-19 is, you know, the biggest possible financial shock, really, that people could imagine, and affecting so many more people than we would normally expect to see. So demand for our services went up massively, and our services actually were positioned to, all of them still accessible through the whole of lockdown, because we do so much digitally through our online benefits calculator, our grant search, which is online, and our grants program, which is giving cash grants to people. We had a special coronavirus response fund as well. So demand increased massively. the team, you know, as we all did, went straight to working from home. And I think we did an excellent job for an organisation that was not really used to those practices. Lots of paper files, lots of people who are, you know, very comfortable in coming to the office every day and decorating their desks. That's always a sign that I say of, you know, if you've got lots of people decorating your desks, you're probably not naturally the most kind of digital in terms of lots of your working practices. And that's no criticism, it's just where a lot of people were at. And we kind of had a split where, you know, maybe 20% of the staff team incredibly digital, working on all of our products, very comfortable with that side, and other people less so. So it has been a coming together where those people who were more comfortable, more savvy, were supporting the people who weren't, and doing that that shared culture piece, but with a massive acceleration. So, you know, not the way that we might conceive it, where we think about how do we change a culture and it's going to be years and years and this is how it's all going to play out. It was days and weeks, and absolutely had to happen, because if it didn't, we wouldn't have been able to get grants out to people. We wouldn't have been able to support people through those online tools. So I think proof of what you can do when you really come together. And a big aspect of it has been our approach to data and insight. And because we have these online tools, we're able to capture so much information about people, what their financial situations are, what they were dealing with before the pandemic, what's going on for them now, their mental health and well-being, etc. So that information has been really crucial in terms of helping us shape our current services and helping us move towards new services. And we just weren't as sophisticated in terms of how we approach that data and insight before the pandemic. You know, that's another example of acting very, very quickly, bringing a new team together and seconding people from different areas, and then looking at how do we actually bring those insights into the rest of the organisation, to changing what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, and looking at as well partnering with other organisations to share data and insights, so we're actually more we're working better across the sector. And I'd say I think that's the point I'll end on, is that cross-sector collaboration has, in the experience of Turn to Us, has strengthened, where, you know, more conversations are just happening where it's like, why don't we just do that? You know, a partnership or a collaboration would work really well in this case. Let's get on and set that up, because time is of the essence.
Good, great. Well, that's been a great summary of where you are with each of your organisations. This session's intended to be very interactive, so I want to encourage everybody who's out there, and I see we've got a good number of people online still, which is really good to see. Do please put your questions in via the Q&A button, and I'll endeavour to get through as many of them as we can. I do have a few pre-prepared though, obviously, so we will move forward with those. And I guess just kind of building on the last question, I think the whole COVID lockdown will have stress tested quite a number of digital processes, you know, the kind of volumes that we maybe saw in the pre-lockdown scenario where people had a choice of channels that they might use. Obviously, everything got channeled a lot more through just being digital now. So I'm really interested in what learning you had from that. Maybe start with you on that one, Joe. Sorry, you were drinking.
So this is my incredibly huge vat of tea. My teacups have got much bigger during lockdown when nobody can really see me in the office, but then I forget they can see me on Zoom. Anyway, to the question, I think you know that it's probably picking up on what I said in my last point, that learning piece. You know, because we were predominantly digitally focused in terms of our work anyway, we've been very, very conscious of the fact that for people who can't access digitally, They were previously maybe using our referral partners. Lots of organisations such as housing associations, small local charities will use the Turn to Us benefits calculator, will use the grant search, but they'll use it in their little office where someone can pop by, or somebody will use it and they'll go out to somebody's home, and that's not been possible. We've lost that, and so the reliance on our helpline has been increasing, and at the same time, you know, there have been challenges there around, are we always able to be online, or our helpline team able to work from home, you know, so things that we've had to respond to. We've had to scale up that helpline offer to make sure that people don't get left behind, and become, I think, even more conscious of that digital divide. And I don't think it's something that goes away. You know, I think it's something that we have been conscious of in the past, but the attention has turned up on that, and looking, because of that learning, because we can see that some people just aren't able to access our services that should be able to. Looking at how do we address that. So as I've said, we can support people through our helpline, or maybe supporting with those other channels, but also what can we do, what role can we play for people to learn those skills, for people to get access to the devices that they might not have had before. And I think that's been a really good thing about our coronavirus response fund that we were able to launch. People were using that fund and applying for money to say, I need a laptop for my kids to do their schoolwork, or I need an iPad because I live alone and I can't connect with anyone and I can barely go outside. So responding in, you know, more nuanced, empathetic ways to that, the data that we have, to say, you know, we can support with a channel mix, but we can also support by helping more people to get online. And even to the extent of exploring conversations where can we now use our tools to help train people on using online financial tools, so people's online financial literacy increases. So, you know, I think there are many aspects to that.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I'm really glad you brought out that whole point about the accessibility and the digital divide as well, because I think it's been one of the areas that I've been worrying about a lot, that though it's often more efficient and actually necessary to try and do things digitally in the new environment we're in, there are people who can't access that. And it's just so important that we don't leave them behind. So I was really pleased that you covered that. Naomi, have you got anything to add to what Joe said?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, I would definitely echo everything that Joe said. I mean, I think from a kind of internal perspective, we are the kind of digital processes that have really been tested for us as kind of like internal communication. And again, like thinking about being a small team, we're used to all sitting around a very small and to Joe's point, decorated desk. And thus a lot of our internal communication kind of happening organically and happening naturally. And so we've had to kind of take some time to reset on that and be really, really clear about which tools we use and why. And I think for us, that's probably been the main thing internally. I think to Joe's earlier point about collaboration, that's something we've seen massively in our community, and I would say is kind of how we've seen the community responding to some of those digital processes being kind of stress tested. So a lot of the work that I do is about connecting people up across the financial system, including the third sector, where they think that they could benefit from kind of collaborations or partnerships to help the work that they're doing. And we have seen that go up massively in this time, particularly as people are needing to do cross referrals, but also kind of pool and compare resources, and you know, in a fast changing policy environment, build resource banks, and also understand like what services are still available to people. And again, kind of in the money and debt advice context that Joe was talking about. So that's something I really, really hope will continue after the pandemic. In regards to the digital divide question, I mean, I think in the finance context, we've seen this really, really starkly during COVID-19 in regards to access to cash. There was a great article in The Guardian yesterday featuring one of our senior fellows, Brett Scott, about how the move away from cash during the pandemic is hurting the most vulnerable. And of course, Rishi Sunak had kind of committed to protecting cash in his budget, but then coronavirus came along and loads of retailers just refused to accept cash, even though that wasn't actually advised by the WHO. And who's that hurting the most? It's hurting the over 1 million people in the UK that are still unbanked, elderly people, many of whom are shielding, migrants without legal immigration status, women suffering from domestic abuse, and so forth. So that's just one example of how the digital divide is showing up in our area of work. And we think it's really, really important that the charity sector continues to advocate for those who are digitally excluded, and we're doing what we can to support that. Another point, though, I would make is that I think it's important to acknowledge that in a lot of sectors, and certainly in finance, and actually the charity sector, as both Emily and Joe have alluded to, COVID-19 has accelerated the digital transition that's already underway rather than starting it. So a lot of our work in the past 2 years has been thinking about how the third sector, but also responsible finance providers, can kind of get prepared for the digital revolution and work with that to better serve their customers, both in terms of harnessing opportunities, but also mitigating and avoiding risks. And I think digital exclusion is one of those risks, but there's also risks around deepening inequality, irresponsible use of data, for example, finance providers using the data to fine-tune prices to the highest that customers will pay, to target irresponsible products to vulnerable customers, and so forth. So yesterday we actually hosted a webinar with the debt advice charity Step Change on exactly that. And I think a big thing that came out of that webinar is that charities absolutely must and should engage with the digital, and there's a lot of opportunities there, but it's also important not to get wowed by tech. And to kind of really, really start from the point of, okay, what do our users need? What do they want? And in some places, because of digital exclusion, that won't be tech. So really kind of starting from that point. And we're actually launching a new kind of area of work on this called Transforming Data. So if anyone's interested in finding out more about that, then they can check it out on our website.
Brilliant. Thank you, Naomi. I'm going to move into some of the questions that have come in now as well, because I want to make sure that people get lots of opportunities to ask those. So the first question, this is actually from Rebecca, and it's, what has been the most unexpected thing you've learned about your work and your organisation as a result of coronavirus and the lockdown? And I think if we could maybe go to Emily first for this one, that'd be great.
Well, I think, as many people alluded to, collaboration has massively increased, and something we've been doing at our organisation as part of the furloughing process is actually looking to redeploy people. So I've had the lovely Eve, who normally sits in our community neutering team, seconded to my team part-time. And it's been absolutely fascinating with learning kind of that side as well, because we learned a lot from her about how persuading communities to do neutering is a lot about human behaviour, and there's a lot we can learn about that for digital marketing. So I think that's been one of the great things we've had, because under normal circumstances, we might do kind of a day in a different part of the business, but you wouldn't have the chance to really deepen those relationships. And it's been absolutely fascinating for her to learn about the digital, but us to learn about neutering and seeing what the crossover is. And I think we've learned a lot from different bits of the business. Like I was mentioning before, we've launched Moggy modules online, and that's come about from staff who are parents talking about homeschooling and their own experiences. And so I think there's been much more collaboration. And as my team work remotely pre-COVID and have done for a while, we're used to kind of having those sort of water cooler chats over Teams and online. And I think it's that sort of thing that's really valuable to spark ideas. And it's how we can encourage organisations post-COVID to continue doing that sort of remote chit-chat.
Joe, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, it's interesting because initially when you said the question, I said that I've been so new in my role that learning about the organization and learning about the role has been through this lens. So it's kind of interesting to disaggregate that. I suppose what I would offer is, for me, it's really been around leadership and around the relationships with the senior leadership team at Turn to Us. And in our structure, that's the chief exec and the 3 other directors and myself. And it's my first time being in that role within a charity and being part of that senior leadership team structure. And so there's been a learning curve there. But working so closely together through Zoom and spending so much time together, we have actually built our relationships through digital. And so when we say, you know, it isn't the same, it's not the same as being in real life and being in the same room, but the quality of the relationships, the quality of the trust and the depth of sharing that we've been able to have, and therefore the quality of work that we've been able to do has just been incredible. And I think that's been a huge learning curve for me. And you know, I guess that's the leadership of Turn to Us. So it's part of the organization. Something I'll mention that's really helped with that is a tool called the Thinking Environment. And there's a book by Nancy Klein called Time to Think that explains it, but essentially giving everyone time to make their points and to share. So a minute or 2 minutes to explore a topic or to explore an answer to a question. And it works, so it makes Zoom calls so much better because there's no talking over each other. Everyone feels they have enough time and crucially attention to explore different topics. And so I've been impressed in a stressful time how we've been able to carve out those moments to think well. And where it relates particularly to the digital, I think is, you know, I felt there's been time and opportunity to explore those tech topics, digital topics that I always worry that, you know, other senior leaders might not know because it's not their deep specialism, but we've had that time to really understand it, for people to ask their questions, to explore, and then to make the right decisions on our more strategic tech choices, which has been fantastic.
Good. And anything unexpected for you, Naomi?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily unexpected, but I think one thing that I've been struck by is how much our kind of purpose as an organisation has stayed true and stayed strong through the pandemic. That although the context that we're operating in has massively changed, actually what we're doing, what we're trying to do is more important than ever. And the ways that we do it might have been adapted because of this context, and there might be slight shift in priorities, but really kind of the core and the foundations of our work have stayed the same. And that has, I think, been really, really, really encouraging, and also enabled kind of what Joe spoke about really kind of trusted and effective work and relationships, even when we're not all together.
Good, thank you. Going to go to, Naomi's actually answered the next question herself, but I'm going to give the others a chance as well. So one of the, Sean has actually, just to paraphrase, hasn't COVID just accelerated the digital transformation trend that was already happening? So Naomi, you've already said that already, but I want to give the other two an opportunity. Do you agree, or do you think it's actually enabled some jumps in thinking that wouldn't have happened otherwise? Maybe start with Emily on this one.
I think I'm not necessarily keen on the phrase digital transformation, purely because a lot of people feel they don't need to be transformed, and that gets a lot of people's backs up. But I think, so in our case, as well as across the sector, a lot of organisations had some sort of big digital transformation plan. And I think it's not just accelerated it, but also really kind of hammered home, why do we want to do it? That it's not digital transformation for its own sake. It's thinking, what do we want to be able to do better? What to be able to, whether it's raise more money or work better kind of in terms of internal comms. And I think it's really focused down because, particularly with COVID, people have come to it from the point of view of, okay, what do we need to do? We need to do the remote working piece. What digital do we need in order to kind of accelerate that? And so it's maybe changed some mindsets and some of the like focuses of already ongoing work because of COVID.
Good. Yeah, we're on the same wavelength there, Emily, because that's why we actually coined the phrase "be more digital," because we think it's a lot more helpful than telling people that they need to be transformed. But I'm going to go to Jo. What's your perspective on this?
Well, let me try and not repeat what other very esteemed thinkers have shared. But I think firstly, the tone of conversations that I'm having are no longer justifying that something needs to be done digitally. I think there is, now a feeling of digital, maybe not by default, but digital is in the frame. And then we also need to think about those people for whom digital is not an option. So I think that is more the nature of the conversation, which is positive from my perspective. It changes that conversation and moves it forward. The second part of it is more the staff members' use of digital tools. And I think I've observed, maybe a mini techlash that I've been part of, backlash against technology, where in those first few weeks, it's great, we'll Zoom everywhere, we'll, be Trelloing and Slacking to our heart's content, and let's help all of our colleagues get up to speed on these tools. And I think just the fatigue of spending all of our time digitally, I think that's something we just need to keep an eye on and keep supporting people with. And I had a lovely message from a colleague earlier, and she said, yeah, I definitely want to use Trello to manage this project, but I'll just put everything in Excel first. And I thought, but so there's like a strong desire to use the tools, but just still not knowing. So I think it's an ongoing process. And that's, again, why transformation isn't a great word, because it makes you think that everything's done and over. This is always an ongoing process of support and continuing to educate and get buy-in and make sure everybody's on the page.
Mm. Yeah, great. Right, I'm going to go to my next question now. So I actually touched on this in my introduction to the day, and obviously one of the current big challenges for charities across the whole country is this demand up, income down equation, and how that is balanced overall. So I'm interested in what each of your organisations is doing on this. Maybe start with you, Emily.
Well, I think for the income piece, it's a very mixed bag. I know, for example, digital fundraising, we've seen income massively go up in the last few months, but then that's obviously balanced with the shops to shut, there's no face-to-face fundraising, there's no events. And I think that's common across the sector, that different income streams are up and down. And I think what's really come to the fore is kind of which charities were in a good and bad position before this, that's kind of accelerated that change. And we're quite lucky that we're not planning to make any redundancies at the minute. The income's quite healthy because it's primarily individual giving and legacies that forms the bulk of it. But I think every charity is having to look at particularly the demand side. And I think it's really important when people are taking decisions on furloughing. Like I know a lot of fellow charities have fundraisers, which I'll be honest, I don't agree with, because I think that's kind of really important to keep the fundraisers there and maybe scale back the services short term to enable them to survive longer term. And there's a lot of kind of conversations going on around that, and a lot of charities really struggling. Like in Cat's case, we're anticipating a massive demand for neutering because obviously we've not been able to neuter cats. We're expecting a kitten boom over the summer, and how we can kind of deal with that and kind of allocating our services. And as I mentioned before, we've, as part of the furlough process, been redeploying people across the organisation to kind of still use those skills, even if they can't do their normal day job. And I think in terms of a lot of charities that have seen this as a positive thing, as a chance to innovate, to do a lot more testing, a lot more virtual events and things. So it's not all doom and gloom, but I do appreciate there is a lot of issues. And I think the biggest challenge at the minute is the uncertainty. Like, I'm in the middle of trying to do a reforecast, but trying to know what the picture and what the kind of public mood's going to be, because what we found is the public mood for giving has been really, really high the last few months. There's been a lot of really successful emergency appeals because people really want to support and give, but we don't know if recession hits. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and obviously like the likes of the Great North Run have been cancelled, which would have been a big, particularly for charities in the North East, income stream. And so I think there is that ongoing challenge to try and forecast, and there will unfortunately be cuts. There's already some charities I know of in the North East that have announced they can't reopen because they just don't have the funds. So I think it is a really uncertain picture. And I think it's really important people look at how they can increase the digital fundraising side. That's not the complete saviour, that can't kind of make up for all the other cuts. But I would say it's definitely one to look at.
Thanks. And obviously turn to us, I'm imagining you must have seen a massive increase in demand, Joe. So how are you actually managing this demand income equation?
I'm going to have to use a horrible term. Build once, use many. Boom or something, but this term for if you build a piece of technology, a digital service, then whether it's used by one person or 10,000 people, it's the same cost, right? And so I think some of our digital services, we have benefited from that equation. And so our needs around server capacity and database capacity did spike, and the tech team had some sleepless nights as the various government schemes came online, and we saw massive demands for the benefits calculator, leading to unprecedented universal credit claims. So absolutely inundated. Now things have stabilized a bit just over our normal, where we would normally be at this time of year. We're sort of 15% higher, but it's manageable in those numbers. And then our helpline, obviously I mentioned, big spikes in demand. I suppose the thing that is really different for us has been the pattern of our grant giving. And being able to raise, we're not known as a fundraising charity. It couldn't be more different from Emily and her experiences, because we don't regularly raise a large amount of money from individuals. And in this period we have. We've had a partnership with the Telegraph, which has been amazing. We've brought in, I suppose, kind of mid-level and high-level donors through, more major giving, philanthropic relationships. We've been speaking a lot more to trusts and foundations, and it's actually enabled us to give directly, 1.3 million so far on top of our normal grant giving to individuals. So that's been fantastic when people just need that breathing space. They just need that extra income. But that's set against a context of our major source of income normally being our care home business. And also because we are 120 years old, money that we have in investments. And those are not looking as strong at the moment, and the way ahead isn't necessarily clear. And so, it is a constant balancing. It's about making the most of the opportunities from the fundraised income in the short term, because it's emergency appeal. People want to see that money used for coronavirus, not to say, oh, we need to supplement money we've lost elsewhere. No, we absolutely need to spend that in a way that's what the donors expect, but also then how do we plan for the long term? So I think we are very fortunate as an organisation, and many organisations are facing very, very difficult, tough choices. That's not quite us. At the same time, it's a mixed picture and some difficult calls and rebalancing having to be done.
Thank you. Going going to go in a slightly different direction now. But there's obviously been a lot of debate in the charity sector. It actually started off last year, brought to the fore by Charities So White in particular, but also now the whole killing of George Floyd has brought it really back to the top of the agenda. So I'm really interested, and I know this is a digital session, but I actually view this as such an important issue that I think it should be discussed in everything we do. So I'm really interested in what actions you're taking in your organisations to ensure that you're actually being more inclusive and actively anti-racist, and what action should we all be looking to take in our organisations? Naomi, could I start with you on this one?
Yeah, sure. So I think when talking about Charities So White in a digital context, a point that I'd like to make is also how the Charities So White team and campaign have really kind of demonstrated the power of digital and what it's possible to do online. So I don't know if everyone in the audience is familiar with the kind of story of the Charities So White campaign and how it came about, but it basically started because one of the founders, Fatima, who's a great friend of mine, was sent a concerning training that had some kind of racial stereotypes in it, and she was sent that by a friend online. She then tweeted it, obviously online, and that caused a kind of a furor among her followers and others working in the charity sector about why these racist training materials were being delivered. And then a campaign was launched again on Twitter, where people working across the charity sector were encouraged to bring forward stories and that they'd had of racism in the charity sector and kind of speak out about the things that they'd been experiencing. So that happened, purely in an online space, led by volunteers, internally coordinated via Slack, again online. But what Charities So White have managed to do is, bring to the fore issues that have been going on for, decades, for longer, kind of more effectively than anyone else, I would say, just using online tools. And I think that that's a really, really important lesson for us all. Their kind of latest digital innovation that some of you might have seen is harnessing the power of emojis. So they've been using cookie and pretzel emojis to share kind of stories of racist incidents that have been disclosed by charity member staff and have been delivering people cookies and pretzels via Twitter. So I think that's also an important point to make about how they've really demonstrated what you can do online. Secondly, though, in the context of this discussion about kind of life after COVID, I think COVID-19 has really showed how quickly all organisations, including charities, can change their practices and priorities overnight when they need to. And that's really in stark contrast to how we've seen the charity sector address or not address racism over the past decades, and indeed since the Charities So White campaign was launched. So I think now that we've seen how quickly the charity sector can adapt when it needs to, we need to all push for that level of change on racism as well. In regards to what the lab is doing, so we've been kind of working on embedding anti-racism into our work for a long time. When we were doing our re-strategizing in light of COVID, we actually used Charities So White's position paper on the effect of COVID on communities of colour as a kind of framework to assess what we were doing and decide what to prioritise. But equally importantly, when we're thinking about kind of building back better after COVID-19, which is a kind of big movement in the sector, we're really thinking about how we can prioritise racial justice in that. So in our context, what that looks like is we're planning a project about how we can build the financial system back better after COVID-19. And for us, the question of what does a racially just financial system look like, and how can we advocate for it, and how can we work with different communities of colour to advocate for it, is going to be a big part of that work, and actually will be kind of at the forefront of that work. And I think that's kind of what I would say to everyone, is that that's kind of what my advice would be, is that COVID-19 has given people a kind of opportunity to reset, and has kind of forced people to change their work, in a digital way, but in other ways as well. And I think the call really has to be, now that we are resetting, when we're moving on after COVID-19, anti-racism should be, foundational to the work that everyone across the charity sector is doing.
Thanks for that, Naomi. That's really helpful. Emily, could you add to that from your experience with the Institute fundraising as well?
Yeah, I sit on the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee for the Institute fundraising, and we had Charity Y into our January meeting to discuss the kind of work and what we could do. And it's kind of an ongoing journey for the Institute, but recently they've actually announced a vision for race for the Institute, and it's part of a wider change collective strategy. So it's looking exactly at Naomi's point, what can we change within the fundraising society and how can we change it for the better? And so I would urge you all to look into that change collective, and there's some really practical actions that charities that might have been involved in that people can take for that, for their organisations, but also as an individual.
Brilliant. Yes. Thanks for pointing that out as well. Sure, that's a valuable resource. I'm really conscious of the time, but I do want to give each of you one last question, which I'll ask the same question to each of you. And if we could kind of go for a really short, snappy answer, that'd be great. And the question is really, so what are your next steps on your digital journey? Maybe start with you, Joe.
I feel like I'm just constantly on a digital journey. That's my... Everyone, we're all on a journey. What are the next steps? I think, we are becoming conscious of the likelihood of that second wave, and how can we prepare for that, and how can we learn lessons from our response earlier in the year, and make sure that as leaders and as and across the organisation that we are as well equipped as we can be. I think this is likely to be tougher, and the government retention scheme has supported 9 million people, and that's coming to an end. So what that means for the work of our organisation, and let's be honest, the work of all organisations in civil society is going to be massive. So if this is a time to enjoy some sunshine and get some screen breaks and take a little bit of annual leave before October, then maybe that is something that we should all be thinking about. Just to the last point as well, continuing education in all, in lots of different areas, but I would highly recommend a book called White Fragility, which has been really helpful in deepening my understanding of racism and how to have promote an anti-racist agenda. I think white people in the charity sector have been complacent for too long. So, that is, I would recommend that if you're taking a little bit of time away from the screen, pick up a book and try that one. Good.
Thank you, Joe. Naomi, what are the next steps for your organisation?
Well, yeah, I would echo everything that Joe said. I think one thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently is understanding the greater role of digital comms for us. Now that in a lot of cases, that's our kind of main form of interaction with our community, whereas it wasn't before. Before it was kind of secondary that supported the community programme, and now it's really primary. So I might, Emily, get in touch with you with some tips for that, because it's not something I've got great expertise in. But I think also as an organisation, we're really exploring what we want to look like in the future, and we're in the fortunate position at the moment that we're going through a strategy process, so we can build our strategy kind of in light of COVID-19, rather than having to adapt a strategy to COVID-19, and that's really, really exciting. But we're having big questions of what does the working week look like for us? What does this remote working setup, do we want to keep some elements of that? Do we want to go? There's some charities that have already announced they're giving up their office spaces. Some people are going to do hybrid things, and so we're kind of really actively engaging as a team in those questions, and thinking about the kind of organisation we want to be.
Good. And finally, Emily, what are the next steps for Cats Protection?
I think similar to Naomi, we are in the middle of our strategy rework complete project for the whole organisation, which started at the start of the year and has changed drastically as the year's gone on. And we're also looking at a big Build Back Better project. So it's looking at all the things we started doing. Like, my team was remote before all this, but there were a lot of people at head office. We can't see it going back to a 9 to 5 in head office. So what does that new world look like for the actual practical ways of working, and also what does it look like for service delivery? Are there elements of the hand-free rehoming we might actually want to keep long term, and doing more Facebook Lives for education? That might be things we want to keep. So we're in that sort of process at the minute of almost taking a step back and looking, okay, here's all the things we've done during COVID, which ones of them have really worked, we want to build on, what would we want to take forward but tweak a bit, and what would we want to drop, as well as keep on growing the digital fundraising, which is more important than ever.
Brilliant. Thank you, and thank you to all three of you for what's been a really fascinating session. I feel we could have probably covered twice as long and still not done the subject full justice, but we do unfortunately need to move on now for our next session.